I'm a professor of civil engineering at Arizona State University in the School of Sustainable Engineering. And I've been doing this faculty thing ever since I got my PhD in 2021. So I've been teaching for like 25 or more years. And then COVID happened and they locked me out of my classroom. And it's not really, what I signed up for. It's not what I love about teaching. So I was pretty anti-lockdown, and I got a big mouth on Twitter. And I was critical of the policies that were promulgating throughout our universities, ostensibly to keep our students safe. And I thought they were harmful to our students. I got a lot of crap for my views and for asking the wrong questions online. I got in trouble with my provost and my dean, and my director became notorious as a COVID denying professor. And I decided I was going to change my career. We'd already had Morosco. I was doing ice baths for my own health. I had a prostate scare, an elevated prostate specific antigen, but the ice baths and some ketogenic diet got all that under control. So I already knew about the health and wellness benefits of the ice baths, but I decided in the midst of those lockdowns that I wasn't going to do resilient infrastructure in the same way. I wasn't going to be all about the floods and the earthquakes and things like that in the same way, that I was going to be about mental health. And it turns out that mental health is metabolic health. The more I learned, the more I read, the more I realized the origins of the health crisis in the United States are in the metabolism, which means they're in the mitochondria. Every single leading cause of death from chronic illness in the United States originates in mitochondrial dysfunction. And you don't have to take an engineer's word for it. You can read Ben Bickman's book, How We Get Sick, or Why We Get Sick, and he will detail this out for you. The mitochondrial disorders are the leading cause of dis-ease, not infectious disease, but a state of dis-ease in the United States. And it spills right over into mental health. For here, I go to Chris Palmer. He wrote a great book called Brain Energy, about how the brain is the most metabolically demanding organ in the body. About 25% of the energy that you use is going to be used in your brain. And if the mitochondria in your brain aren't right, your brain won't have the energy to maintain an optimistic outlook, to do problem solving, to manage your mood. So I'm all about the ice baths now. And that doesn't mean I've stopped being a professor. You mentioned already, I wrote this book, Uncommon Cold, the science and experience of cold plunge therapy. This thing is longer than my dissertation. I've got more than 500 scientific footnotes in this book. And there's a lot of books, but this is the definitive scientific work on cold plunge therapy. I'm still a scholar and a professor, but I'm doing it in a different way. And sometimes I get crap. You've never been to medical school. You're not a real doctor. And it's true. I'm a doctor of philosophy. And thank goodness I don't have the handicap of having to unlearn, 8 years of medical training about what drugs are supposed to be prescribed for what condition, that you can create a lifetime royalty stream for what company. I don't do that, Joe. I build machines. And these machines create the environment outside the body that empowers the body to heal itself. So that's kind of where I came from and what I'm doing now and why I'm talking to you.
Perfect. Great introductory. And talking of the book Uncommon Cold, you delve into the science, as you quite rightly mentioned. But based on the existing research and experiments and protocols that you share quite openly in your opinions, which of the protocols, experiments, or the common health issues that are occurring, what seems to be the most promising when it comes to ice baths, and what should people know the benefits of it?
One of the great misconceptions of the pharmaceutical industry is that there is an optimal dose that applies to everyone. When you get like a course of antibiotics or something, your doctor will say, okay, so you take this much and you take it at this time and you get a prescriptive protocol. And it leads people to believe that there's an optimal dose of cold plunge. And there is no such thing. most people understand, if you're going to start a program of weight training, there's not one weight and one number of reps that is optimal for everybody. First, if you're going to work with a trainer, they got to say, well, let's see how you do with this weight. Well, let's see what you can do. They need to get a sense of how strong you are and how you've already trained. Yes. The dose, the protocol that is right for you, and when it comes to cold, depends upon your state of cold training. And so there's a rule of thumb. When you're starting out, you go cold enough to gasp, whatever temperature that is. If you feel the gasp reflex, you know you have activated the sympathetic division of your central nervous system. And then you go long enough, just when you're starting out, long enough to shiver. If you're shivering, then you know you put your body in a state of cold thermogenesis. And if there's no brown fat in your body will begin to recruit it. After you become cold adapted, you don't need to go long enough to shiver anymore. You can maintain a state of brown fat and metabolic health without staying in there long enough to shiver. So the rule of thumb is cold enough to gasp, long enough to shiver when you're starting. And after that, 2 to 4 minutes every day. Susanna Soberg's rule of thumb, 11 minutes a week is pretty good. You get into a metabolic maintenance phase. What I haven't described, though, are what are the indications, what are the signs that would indicate cold plunge therapy is a good idea for you, and what are the contraindications? So we're going to start with the contra first. Despite what Wikipedia says, the number one contraindication for cold plunge therapy is chronic hypertension. When you get in whole body and you're doing an ice bath, vasoconstriction will shrink the blood vessels in your arms and your legs and move that blood into the core. This is part of your thermoregulatory system. So you're trying to maintain a constant or homeostatic core temperature. So all that blood moves into the core and into the part of your body that's not underwater, which is the head. Your blood pressure typically goes up as a result. And ordinarily, that's not a big deal. But if you suffer from chronic hypertension and you go into the cold, there have been 2 reports from medical professionals that have come back to me of someone who's had an acute hypertensive event. So you gotta monitor if you know that you're at risk. Now, these people recovered fine. They got out of the cold, they rewarmed, but an acute hypertensive event can be a dangerous condition. A lot of people ask me about the heart, and that's because there is a theory from Mike Tipton, who's a professor at the University of Portsmouth in the United Kingdom. And he says, look, there's the gasp reflex, which is activation of the sympathetic nervous system. But then there's the dive reflex, which is the parasympathetic activity. And if these two, he says, are in conflict with one another, it could cause an irregular heartbeat. So maybe people with heart issues should be careful. I'm not arguing against heart issues require some care. However, the response of the heart to both the gasp reflex and the dive reflex is not pathological. It is physiological. Your body is designed to respond to stress. The ice bath is a stressor. It is a hormetic stressor. When you gasp, your heart rate will go up. And then when the dive reflex takes over, even though your metabolism is revving, your oxygen consumption can go down. Your heart rate can go down. The dive reflex is to prepare your body for an extended period of do not hold your breath in the ice bath. But your body thinks that you might be diving in, and so it relaxes everything by strengthening the parasympathetic response. Your heart rate will go down. So Tipton hypothesizes that you got one thing putting your heart rate up and another thing putting your heart rate down, and maybe that conflict will be dangerous. I have my doubts. Hypertension is the single most important contraindication, and then heart issues would be a secondary contraindication. The indications, most important one, metabolic dysfunction, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, cold exposure, but either in the bath or in the cold air, will improve your insulin sensitivity. It will resolve conditions of insulin resistance. A lot of medical doctors think that type 2 diabetes is a lifetime degenerative condition, and a lot of medical doctors are wrong. Type 2 diabetes is reversible. I've seen it reverse in case studies that I've personally observed. I've got the lab reports showing that it's reversible. And one of the ways to do it is, for example, a ketogenic diet. You go super low carb, put your body in ketosis. That's wonderful for insulin sensitivity. A lot of people have trouble with that. Compliance is one of the risk factors when someone like a medical professional is prescribing a ketogenic diet. However, if they can do cold exposure, if they can do an ice bath, it will stimulate endogenous ketone production in their own body right away. So one of the ways to build metabolic flexibility, so you can go into keto and out of keto without experiencing what some people call the side effects of keto, without experiencing the discomfort, so that you're metabolically, you can switch from carbs to fat with ease, is to ice bath. Even if you can't exercise, if you find trouble staying ketogenic, the ice bath will stimulate that production of ketones inside your body and improve your insulin sensitivity to such an extent it might resolve your metabolic dysfunction. The whole sequela of other adverse effects that result from metabolic dysfunction will begin to resolve as well. So what are those? Heart disease, Alzheimer's, to some extent obesity, the visceral fat that around your organs that is associated with aging and chronic illness. Cold exposure will remodel the fat composition, moving it out of the liver and out of the viscera, that is out of the core around the organs, and to the skin, the subcutaneous fat, which I have plenty of, but is much lower risk than the visceral. There are a myriad of health benefits that result from the correction of the metabolic disorder that comes with the ice bath. One of the things about the Middle East right now, we were just talking about Dubai, Kuwait. We have some customers. I sent you a link to one that's open to the public in Kuwait. Is there is an epidemic of type 2 diabetes. It is a disease of overnutrition, too many carbs, too many seed oils, too many processed foods. And there's no cold. There's no cold in Kuwait or Dubai or Saudi Arabia or Qatar. And there's no cold in Phoenix, Arizona. So for me to give my body the cold that it's expecting, I got to build this ice bath and install it, on my balcony and get in it every day. Other people, if you're in Finland, yeah, you can cut a hole in the lake. You can jump in.
Perfect.
You get plenty of cold.
Is there, for some of these challenges that one would have and the issues that perhaps ice bath can help with, as you've quite rightly mentioned and seen plenty of case studies and experienced yourself, is there a particular protocol? You said there's no one size fits all. There is dosages. I know for yourself, you briefly touched on the fact that you lowered your PSA and raised your testosterone, which I know here in Dubai, hormonal replacement therapy is such a big topic right now, and you happen to do it somewhat naturally along with a ketogenic diet, etc. So is there a particular protocol that one should do, or is it specific to whether it's diabetic, whether it's insulin resistant, whether it's to increase your testosterone, or could you just shed some light on this a little bit for some people?
First, let's talk about testosterone, and then we'll talk about some of the protocols. What most people never hear from their doctor is that testosterone is produced via the mitochondria. That is, cholesterol is the precursor or the substrate from which testosterone is formed. It is the mitochondria that take cholesterol and convert it to a steroidal precursor to testosterone. When you suffer from mitochondrial dysfunction, producing testosterone is sort of last on the list. Your mitochondria are like, look, we got a lot of things to do here. We're trying to take care of the brain. We're trying to take care of the muscles. We're trying to, supply all the ATP that your body needs to heal. The immune system has needs. And it cuts back on testosterone because the mitochondria are not at their peak function. When you fix the mitochondria, now the mitochondria say, great, I can grab the cholesterol and I can create these steroidal precursors that will then be converted into sex hormones. And that is true whether you're a man or a woman. Although men have like 10 times the total testosterone that women do, Testosterone is the dominant sex hormone in women as well. A healthy woman will have 3 or 4 times the testosterone, which is associated with the male sex hormone, than they will estrogen, which is associated with the female. So both men and women right now are suffering from this widespread low or insufficient testosterone, and it results from mitochondrial dysfunction. However, men and women produce it in different places in their body. In a man, almost all the testosterone is coming out of their testicles. The testicles are held outside the body, and they're meant to be cool. And so, men, the function of the testicles isn't supposed to be at 98.6 Fahrenheit or whatever. They run a little cool, but not freezing cold. When a man gets into the ice bath, it will not stimulate a testosterone boost right away unless he exercises afterwards, unless he rewarms afterwards. And there's a great study in 1991 where they tested this cold stimulation and then exercise versus exercise and then cold stimulation. Now, the way most people were taught to do it is they do their workout, they go for a run, whatever, and then they get cold.
Quite common, right?
Right? That lowers testosterone. That hurts your gains. That's poor for your muscles. But in the Japanese study, when they reversed it, cold stimulation first, and then exercise, testosterone went up. Luteinizing hormone went up. Luteinizing hormone is what signals the testicles to make the testosterone in the first place. So for men, it is super important to do the ice bath to pre-cool the exercise. Do the ice bath before you do the exercise. It doesn't take a lot of exercise. A brisk walk, a treadmill, a stationary bike, enough to get the limbs re-warmed seems to be sufficient to get the testosterone boost. Women are different. Women make their testosterone in the ovaries. About a quarter of it is made in the ovaries, but the ovaries, of course, are inside the body. The rest of their testosterone comes from the adrenal glands, the skin cells, and the fat cells. An ice bath stimulates adrenal glands, skin cells, and fat cells to this hyper level of activity. Women get an immediate testosterone boost. Now, there's only been one study that backs this up, and I'd love to see more, but the reports that I get from women telling me about what their experience are is consistent with the study that showed cold stimulation results in an immediate lift of testosterone levels in the bloodstream from women and not necessarily men. So what's the protocol? Pre-cool your exercise. You get into the ice bath. If it's super cold, it only takes like 2-3 minutes. You will feel, something is working when you get into the ice bath, And then it's a good idea for men and women to exercise afterwards, but for men, it is essential. One rule of thumb that's worked well for me is 2 minutes of exercise for every 1 minute in the ice bath. And it's not even a lot. So if I do 3 minutes in the ice bath, I'm doing 6 minutes of push-ups or steel mace or pull-ups or something like that. I don't have to do 6 minutes straight through. I might do a couple of minutes, catch a breath, do a couple more minutes, catch a breath, and then finish it off so I can do a little steel mace. I can do some lunges. I can do some pull-ups. Boom, and I've got it. That's how little exercise we're talking about, and my results have been pretty good.
Yeah, astounding. And I think you wrote extensively about this on your blog. You have a blog, several blogs on this with cited research, and you alluded to the females as well, which I found fascinating. And also you share your results openly to the public.
You are right, Joe. Arizona State University pays my salary as a researcher. And I don't need to double collect on that, So everything I've ever written, it's all available on the Morozco Forge science page. So you can read about it for free. But some people, they want to write in the margins like my mother taught me to do when I was studying. They need the hard copy. And so you can buy the book. It's not on Amazon. It's only at morozcoforge.com. It's like $35. We'll ship it all over the world for like an extra $15. I'm not saying that it's cheap or it's a good deal, but I had to make it available in a form that I knew people would appreciate. They got to get their highlighters out and things like that. The only thing is, I've learned so much in the last 6 months, I feel like I got to update the book again.
I was going to say. Thank you for sharing about the pre-cooling, because I think that's super important for especially many people in our audience have those that experience utilizing ice baths as it is. there's a couple of more questions, more to do with the psychological aspect of this.
I'm glad you brought this up. To the extent that low mood or major depression results from metabolic dysfunction, and it's a great extent, it can be resolved at higher temperatures. So what would this be? 15 degrees C, it's fine. If you're going to go to the beach and the ocean is, let's say, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, I'm trying to speak to an international audience, it's going to feel cold. If you're getting the gasp reflex, you've activated your central nervous system. This is good for your mood. You're going to get a dopamine boost, and it is impossible to be in a bad mood if you've got 3 times the dopamine coursing through your bloodstream, that you had when you started. And so there is an immediate mood lifting experience of cold plunge therapy or winter swimming. And then there's a deeper experience. There are some good case studies. As a matter of fact, Mike Tipton at University of Portsmouth has monitored some of these and published some of these of people resolving major depression by doing winter swimming. But the deeper level is what I call psychological resilience. So I'm a scholar of resilience, and I used to think it was, it was about the concrete and the steel and how do we protect the civil engineering infrastructure during the hurricane and that kind of thing. And it's not. The studies that I've done of the major disasters, and in particular the near misses, the dam that did not collapse, Apollo 13 coming back, with the astronauts alive. The difference is never in the physical materials. It's always in the human ingenuity. Real resilience exists in the creativity and the relationships among people. At some point after you become cold adapted, you will experience what Joe Rogan calls the inner bitch, the part you don't want to get in. This is every day for me. I will stare at the ice and I'll say, I could skip a day.
This never subsides.
Who would know?
This
right?
never subsides.
You have that. It's that fear. Eleanor Roosevelt said, do something every day that scares you. This is not for people who are trying to get over low mood or major depression. This is about those people who are trying to maintain the super competitive edge, the ones who are pushing themselves every day because they're ambitious or, I don't know, they're working on something really important. They have an agenda that sort of transcends their own comfort level. And they say, I will push myself this morning at 33, at 34, at 1 or 2 degrees C because I don't want to. And
yeah, exactly.
Andrew Huberman explained how he had David Goggins come on his podcast, toughest man in the world. Turns out David Goggins suffers from Raynaud's syndrome. Raynaud's syndrome is an exaggerated physiological, psychological feedback loop. It's an exaggerated response to the cold that shuts off all the circulation, for example, in the fingertips. And he's posted pictures of his fingertips just ghostly white because he has this overreaction to the cold. And Huberman says, well, David, I was waiting for you to be on this podcast because I have been reading about a portion of the brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. Some scientists, he says, think that is the seat of the will to live. Now, we think of David Goggins as like, toughest, most disciplined man in the world. And Huberman says, if you do not do things that you hate, your anterior mid-cingulate cortex shrinks. You lose that discipline and you lose touch with that will to live. It is only when you do the miserable, wretched things that you hate that the anterior mid-cingulate cortex will grow. And so it's that extreme motivation that is exemplified by guys like Goggins or Rogan. That's where you really need the cold. If it was purely metabolic, fine. Stick with your 6 or 7 degrees Celsius. 10 degrees Celsius is fine. But if you want to reach down into like that psychological core, then you got to be down near freezing. You got to see the ice. At least I need to see the ice in the water. Rogan says he goes that cold because it sucks worse. And it's not a great tagline for marketing, but I know exactly what he's talking about. We want that thing that scares us, and then we feel like we're winners.
And I didn't plan to ask this question, but I'm interested to know, there is, and I don't know if I read it on your website or somewhere, but your ice baths purposely make ice. And that in itself also has a psychological impact on one. correct? Over just cold water, for instance. It's cold, of
Correct.
course, but with the ice, I believe there's something in that as well.
There is a phenomenon called anticipatory thermogenesis, and nobody knew a dang thing about it until Professor Tim Noakes. He's a medical doctor and a PhD, if I remember this correctly, but he's in South Africa. Now, South Africa is about as close to the Antarctic Ocean as anybody's going to get. Lewis Pugh is this extreme sports, world record holding ocean swimmer. And he swims at the North Pole, and he's like, I want to swim the Antarctic Ocean. So he goes to South Africa. And Tim Noakes says, okay, I'll supervise you. We got to keep track of your vital signs and your core temperature. And he gets Lewis Pugh all wired up. And Noakes noticed that when Pugh would go to the beach to begin his swim, his core body temperature would go up even before he got into the water. And that was because Pugh's mind was imagining what he has to do to train for his Antarctic swim. Noakes coined this term called anticipatory thermogenesis to describe how the mind can activate the brown fat without any sort of environmental stimulus. Wim Hof reports the same thing. He reports that he can use, with the power of his mind, that is, use his brain to activate his metabolism or his immune system. And most people think that that's a bunch of hippy-dippy crap. And I think that Wim Hof and Lewis Pugh and Tim Noakes are correct. I have noticed this phenomenon in one other reader who is tracking his temperature, like right before he gets in. He noticed the same anticipatory thermogenic response. Scott Carney writes about how he has experienced it. I think I've experienced it myself, but without the thermometer, because when I look at that ice, I already get the chills. Now, the ice looks great on Instagram, but there's something psychological about looking in the water, seeing the ice chunks floating in the ice bath that activates the brain, and then through the nervous system, activates the brown fat, and the rest of the body begins preparing for what right now it is only imagining. And that anticipatory response, it's not as strong if you don't see the ice cubes, because you're losing that kind of sensory stimulation.
No, thank you. Thank you for the explanation. Didn't quite know the answer behind it or the reason, but that makes perfect sense. And you're a man of opinions, as you mentioned at the beginning of the interview. But with so much circulating online about cold exposure, some true, some misleading, if you could address one widespread misconception and spotlight one critical truth that everyone should know about deliberate cold immersion, what would that be?
Let's talk about a truth about social media, and then we'll talk about a truth about cold immersion. People who make their living, as these influencers who make their living online, they are there for clicks. They're not there for truth. They're not there to help you. They're there to to entertain you so that you will keep clicking. And one of the things that became popular in 2024 was kind of the anti-ice bath movement. Oh, an ice bath is like being on the Titanic, or whatever the new meme was. Some of these influencers discovered that it was more popular to bash ice baths. Ice baths don't work, than it is to support ice baths, because what sells in social media is novelty. And so I might come out and say, there are 17 FDA-approved drugs for multiple sclerosis, and none of them work as well as cold plunge therapy. 3 likes,
Yes.
Because who cares? Who cares about people with MS, besides me? And I've got these 2 documented case studies, and I've got literature that goes back to 1955 that says ice baths are more effective for managing the symptoms of multiple sclerosis and other autoimmune disorders, by the way, than everything that the FDA has already approved. But if you put together a slick video with a beautiful woman in a bikini and you say, ice baths are going to burn out your adrenals, million clicks. And so that's kind of what I'm up against in social media. What do people need to know about ice baths? The truth. It's a hormetic stress. Of course it's a stressor. The exercise is a stressor. Your body needs stress. The absence of stress is death. And I didn't make that quote up. That's coming from Hans Selye, who is again a PhD and an MD, who invented our modern concept of stress. And he was writing about this in the 70s, saying you need stress. And so the typical stress response curve is this upside down U that we call hormesis. If you don't get enough stress, your health state is too low. Hormetic stress, your health state increases until too much stress, not good. Too much exercise will kill you. You need food. Too much food will kill you. If you don't get any cold, you age more quickly. You go into metabolic dysfunction. You experience a state of disease. A little bit of cold and your health improves. Too much cold, again, not good for you. So what people need to know is that cold is a hormetic stress, like all the other stressors that they know they need, whether it's intermittent fasting or whether it's sunshine or whether it's exercise. Get just enough to keep yourself in that hormetic state of, I would love to say optimal health, but we don't even know what that is. That healthy well-being state requires stress. And then scroll past the people who say, oh, you're going to burn out your adrenals or whatever it is for clicks. Everything I've ever written on cold plunge therapy is at moroscoforge.com. You can find me, on Twitter, Seager TP, SEAGERTP. So if you want to know what gets me in trouble with my employer, that's the place to look. I'm on Instagram, same thing, SEAGERTP. And I have a Substack, which will probably bore you to tears. I don't put a lot of cold on the Substack. There's more psychology and trauma and relationships. So you can find me there. There's only a little bit of that in the book.
Thomas, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for the questions, Joe.
No, perfect. I really, really like the answers and so passionate. That's what I like.